Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. It is the Wednesday edition of Point of View, and over the next 2 hours, as we almost always will do for you, cover a lot of different topics. First hour, pretty much clear. We had one guest that actually moved to the next hour, so really I have the entire first hour, and it'll be an open line. So if I say something that you agree with or disagree with or want to add to, you are welcome to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. I haven't said much about Cuba, so just in a few minutes we'll get into that. What about the desire for freedom? What is happening to the protesters, which is a very sad story, and whether or not this will bring some kind of change in that communist country that has been dominated by the Castro family and others for just a very long period of time, decades and decades and decades. We'll get into all that in just a minute. We will also get into some other issues, and that is this word misinformation. You know, I want to always try to give you the ability to have a little bit of discernment. And one of the things that I think you should ask yourself when you hear the word misinformation or sometimes disinformation, give me an example. And it has been kind of intriguing to see that when you give an example, for example, it turns out that they really have stories that are maybe ones that the current administration disagrees with, but are not factually incorrect. Or they make a statement like, for example, that all these vaccines, for example, have been certified by the FDA, and yet they're listed as experimental. That apparently came as some kind of news to the White House press secretary, Jen Psaki. So we will get into a little bit of that in terms of the definition of misinformation. And then let's give credit where credit is due. Josh Hawley dug up the fact that where this information was coming from was from a British group that's actually a dark money group. So we'll get into that a little bit later this hour. And since we mentioned the vaccine, it's about time to have an update here. You have a number of lawsuits and other claims being made that we are, for example, undercounting the number of people that have died from the vaccine or taking the vaccine. We don't want to get into whether you died from it or with it, but the bottom line is that is the case. There are now allegations that even those individuals that have had some kind of issue related to that, for example, whether or not they had contraindications, that maybe that has been undercounted as well, and so that's a particular case being brought. And while we're talking about media bias or misinformation, the argument has always been that a disproportionate number of the people that are vaccine hesitant, as they call them, are Trump supporters. And the harsh reality is, whether you like it or not, that's not true. Even if you just look at Republican, Democrat, Independent, 61% of those people who have not had the vaccine or hesitant about the vaccine actually are non-Republican. So anyway, we'll get into some of those issues. But then you might wonder, well, that's a lot in the first hour. What's in the second hour? Well, Dr. Richard Land will be with us. And, of course, he serves as the executive editor of what is called the Christian Post. And there is an article we've posted for you to read. And it is some churchgoers still have no plan to go back just yet. So we're going to talk about what that means for various churches and how to think through some of those issues. And we'll cover those topics as much as we possibly can. And then we'll finish the last half hour with Dr. Clay Lowder. His book is entitled Winter's Travel, and it really is an attempt to go back and look at our health issues. You might even remember yesterday when we got talking about anxiety, we had at least one caller or others suggesting that we need to reevaluate our diet. Agree. I've seen a lot of people as I've been traveling around at airports and in malls and other places that maybe need to reevaluate how much exercise they get and all sorts of other topics that we will sort of get into. And we're going to leave that for the last half hour. It will maybe cause you to reevaluate what you do during the summer and maybe try to set some different kinds of health goals as we go forward. So those are just a good overview of a number of topics. One of those, which I have posted, is on the subject of Cuba. Tony Perkins actually has posted this, and so I give him credit and give you a link to his Washington Watch, in which he says, one thing most Cubans can agree on, this small island nation may never be the same. Some are now saying that the history of Cuba will have been rewritten after Sunday, the 11th of July. That comes from one Catholic leader, and I think that is indeed the case because, as he points out, in just 9 days, more than 6 decades of oppression really have been turned on their head. People have flooded into the streets, risking their lives, and sadly, we've had a number of individuals that were protesters that have disappeared, and we fear for what that might mean. But they are all focusing on the desire for liberty. Now, again, many of those in the streets are carrying a Cuban flag, but isn't it interesting? A good number of others are carrying what? An American flag. At a time when a lot of people have difficulty even standing for the Star-Spangled Banner, feel like asking them to recite the Pledge of Allegiance before a political event is oppression. Here, when people think of liberty, what do they think of? United States of America. Anyway, the other day, Tony Perkins had Congressman Michael Waltz on the program. He is a Republican from the state of Florida, and he pointed out from his vantage point, he says he has never seen anything close to this level of unrest since Fidel Castro overthrew the previous government. By the way, in just a few minutes, I'm also going to quote from a few other people that have connections to Cuba. That would be Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, so might do that after the break. But again, some of the things he said, our folks need to understand just how great we have it here in this country. And that's one of the reasons I want to bring it up. During this summer, it might be good to spend a little bit of time reminding yourself, reminding your children, reminding your grandchildren about the freedom we enjoy. Last night, I went to an event where Colonel Allen West was there, and he asked a very good question. We just had the 4th of July. How many of you on the 4th of July took the time to pull out the Declaration of Independence and read it to your kids or grandkids? Didn't see a hand go up. And it's probably just another reminder that maybe we can use these summer months to remind some of the people in our family, maybe some of the people that we know in our neighborhood, maybe some of the people in our company where we work, that we are so blessed. Because again, Representative Michael Waltz said, we can peacefully protest, our voices can be heard, but somewhere like Cuba, you are risking torture, you're risking death, just for taking a stand. And so he points out that many of them just finally said, look, we live in abject poverty. It's hard to figure out where to get the next meal. So what's the worst? I get thrown behind bars, actually get some food, or I get killed. And so this protest in Cuba, I think we will trace back to a very significant day, and that will be July 11th of this year. And if you would like to read the entire very, very helpful discussion about this and what was happening and what might happen in the future, what we can do, obviously, to support those individuals. After all, we can certainly pray for believers in the streets, and I know of many people that have had evangelistic outreaches to Cuba, including Jim Dennison's who've been in studio. We'll take a break, talk a little bit more about Cuba right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, Americans don't know much about the Constitution, and it apparently is getting worse. 9 years ago, I wrote and recorded a commentary about constitutional literacy. Back then, I quoted John Whitehead of the Rutherford Institute, who testified before a subcommittee of the Senate Judiciary Committee concerning the rule of law. He provided some alarming statistics based upon a survey done about 10 years ago. They found that only 1 in 4 Americans could name more than one of the freedoms guaranteed by the First Amendment. In one study, they found that only 1 person out of 1,000 people could name all 5 First Amendment freedoms. Those would be the freedom of religion, speech, press, and assembly, along with the right to petition the government for redress of grievances. I thought about those statistics when I read an editorial written by Cal Thomas. He quoted from a recent poll conducted by the University of Pennsylvania's Annenberg Public Policy Center. They found that 37% of those interviewed could not name any of the 5 rights protected in the First Amendment. You know, nearly a decade ago, we were lamenting how few could name more than one of the First Amendment freedoms. Today, more than a third cannot name any of the freedoms in the First Amendment. Americans are not only ignorant of the Constitution, many are ignorant of the structure of government. A third could not name one of the 3 branches of government, and about 1/4 could correctly name all 3. Unfortunately, some of these Americans who are ignorant of the Constitution and of our government actually vote in elections. You can't protect the rights guaranteed in the Constitution if you don't know what they are. You can't protect our system of government if you don't know how it is structured. I hope you can see that we have lots of work to do to educate Americans about the Constitution. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, I want to talk about Cuba for a few more minutes. And again, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. As we went to a break, I encourage you to pray for especially some of the Christian leaders there in Cuba. And I wanted to give you a brief quote, which we also have documented on our website, from Jatniel, who is the Perez, who is the director. Jatniel Perez is the director of the William Carey Biblical Seminary and a pastor of the Centro Bíblico Crecer for Cuba, in which he has pointed out that some of the people that he knows have disappeared, which is such a sad thing. Others are in prison for no other reason than joining with the parishioners on the street. And he says, for the moment, we don't know where they are. We don't know their status or anything. We just know that they have charges against them. Like everyone else in Cuba, he insists they just want freedom. They just want to have everything possible for them and have their needs met. And so we so often take for granted the ability to get up in the morning, to have enough food to eat, to get up in the morning and know that we have the freedom to even disagree with our own government and not have to pay a heavy price. And yet that is not the reality for many Christians around the world, including this island nation just to the south of us. And so I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about Cuba. Jerry Newcomb, by the way, has a very good piece in WorldNet Daily that you can probably find as well. But one of our friends, Dylan Burrows, put together something just recently in which he pulled together some of the statements made by some of the senators. In just a minute, I'm going to be quoting from some other members of Congress. And, of course, we were just quoting a minute ago from one of the representatives. That would be Representative Michael Waltz in the House, who is a Republican from Florida. But I was waiting to see what kind of comments we might get from at least two of our U.S. senators that have Cuban connections. And one of those would be Ted Cruz. And Ted Cruz, though born, I believe, in Canada, nevertheless, his father grew up in Cuba. And many of the people, not just Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, but I've mentioned others, have been pointing out the irony of the fact that at a time when, according to the Department of Homeland Security, our southern border is reaching unprecedented levels of people coming across the border, almost with no resistance, the same Department of Homeland Security issued this statement, quote, "It is illegal for boaters to depart with the intent to travel to Cuba for any purpose without a permit." The Department of Homeland Security said in this advisory that any boater intending to enter Cuban territorial waters, obviously to help those who want to leave Cuba, must get permission from the U.S. Coast Guard, and violators risk facing fines of up to $25,000 a day and 10 years in prison. And it has been striking that when there have been those who have tried to put together a flotilla of 100 boats to support the Cuban protesters, this has been the reaction. And also the statement from the Secretary of Homeland Security that anyone coming from Cuba will not be allowed to stay. But you have to recognize that we allow so many individuals that are coming right now from Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala, Costa Rica, Honduras, wherever they might have come, with little chance that we'll ever find them again. We tell them to come on this particular date in court, and then we release them, and many times don't even know where they are. As a matter of fact, the federal government, as we've now found out, has spent a fair amount of time sending them to the interior of the country and to other places as well. So this has not escaped the notice of at least two individuals who have connections to Cuba. One of those is Ted Cruz, who is the senator from Texas, who said, quote, "This battle for freedom is personal to me. When Batista staged a coup in Cuba and became the brutal dictator in the 1950s, my father fought against his regime. My dad was imprisoned and tortured. His captors broke his nose and bashed in his front teeth until they were dangling from his mouth. He says, my father fled Cuba, the country he had fought for and had been brutalized trying to save in 1957, and came to the United States, came to Texas, with $100 sewn into his underwear. He had nothing. And so, again, he talks about the fact that America must respond. Over the next few days, the world has seen that the American people stand squarely with the men and women of Cuba in their noble fight for liberty. So that comes from Ted Cruz. Let me add another one, another individual with connections to Cuba, and that would be the senator from Florida, Marco Rubio. His parents actually emigrated from Cuba and also had supported the Cuban freedom effort. But he actually put together a resolution to stand with the courageous people of Cuban descent. But he also, in a statement, said, quote, "The Cuban people are courageously standing up for their freedoms after 62 years of subjugation under a communist dictatorship. This is truly a historic moment. one that, as a Cuban American, I'm proud to witness. The people of Cuba have made their voices clear. We must stand in support of the Cuban people's ongoing efforts to live in a nation free from tyranny and censorship. So a lot more we could say about Cuba, but I thought I would mention that. We may come back to it on Friday's weekend edition, because we'll have Lathan Watts with us and Dr. Merrill Matthews, and so those will be some topics we might want to address there as well. One of the other articles I want to point you to is one having to do with the issue of misinformation. This is a very good piece that appeared in the Federalist, and the article goes on to point out that we keep hearing this phrase misinformation, and just the other day the argument being made by the current president, Joe Biden, is that Facebook is killing people. And of course you have the White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki arguing that there were 12 people on social media posting what the Biden administration considers to be misinformation, and the White House is actively flagging those posts for Facebook and then trying to essentially have, if you will, deputizing Facebook to be an extension of the federal government's communication office. And so you have that issue surfacing right now. This article goes on and reminds us of other issues of misinformation. One of those goes back to the Hunter Biden laptop, which was simply called Russian disinformation. By the way, if you've been listening to some of the talk shows, there's now a video and an audio clip surfacing about how Facebook said they were actually contacted by the Justice Department, in particular the FBI, saying that if you get a data dump of information, it's probably Russian disinformation, even though that data dump comes from the Hunter Biden laptop, was actually produced by the New York Post, the oldest newspaper in the country, one of the largest newspapers in the country, but that's all disinformation and misinformation, so we saw how that worked out. They also go into, in this article, some others pointing out that some other examples of misinformation actually come from Jen Psaki, requoting some of these statements about Donald Trump calling the troops losers and suckers, which has been actually completely dismissed, the Russian bounty stories, and on and on. So if you're really looking for disinformation, you've gotten a fair amount of it actually coming from the administration. And after we come back from the break, I also want to talk about this particular piece has a wonderful summary, what's called a mashup of all the statements made by Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and a variety of others on why they will not take the vaccine because it's a Trump vaccine. Now they've completely flipped around and say you're unpatriotic if you don't take the vaccine, but it's a reminder that the people calling for people to be really wary of the vaccine are the ones now demanding that you take it and are going to go door to door to make sure that you take it. But you might wonder, where did these 12 social media personalities come from? Well, it turns out that we owe a debt of gratitude to Senator Josh Hawley, which he points out that really what this comes from is a British group called the Center for Countering Digital Hate. It's a dark money group that has been working over the years to try to remove various conservative groups from various websites, including the Federalist, one I just quoted a minute ago, Breitbart, and others. And so we now know that when they rattle off these 12 individuals, well, it comes from a group that is really hiding from public scrutiny, is a dark money group, and maybe isn't exactly the most reliable source for some of this. But nevertheless, it's back to my key point. When you hear somebody talking about disinformation or misinformation, give me an example. When we come back from the break, we'll talk about some of that. And if nothing else, try to give you a little more discernment, because in this media environment, we're going to need that more and more. If you want to find some of the articles we're talking about, of course, you can find them on our website, pointofview.net. Let's take a break. We've got a lot more to cover, and we will do that right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View.
The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. And let me just get into some controversial issues. We never stray away from them, and we'll get into the issue of vaccines. Now, again, let me just hasten to add that if you go up and down where we broadcast from, you're going to have some people who have already had the vaccine, some that have not. So I'm not trying to argue one way or the other, although I've tried to give you a lot of information, and that's the point. It is becoming more and more obvious that even trying to give the basic information, even trying to ask the question, how many people have been adversely affected by taking the vaccine? Those questions are not allowed to be asked. Well, we can ask them here at Point of View. But before we get into some of those, let me mention that one of the articles I've posted is by Matt Vespa. It is entitled, Why Anti-Vaxxers Are Having Their Day, and it's not because of Trump supporters. Now, the article that we've posted here at the moment, it only has like the first paragraph, but I know Karen's working to put the entire article there. But I don't need to even have you read all of it, although you might want to, because it's really fascinating. Because first of all, to give you the disclaimer, Matt Vesta says, I got COVID last November. He has the antibodies, but I didn't need the vaccine, but he got it anyway. So he is not against vaccines, and he was not against this vaccine. But like a number of other people that strive to be honest, he says, even though I got vaccinated, I am a little bit appalled that the argument that keeps being made by not only the people in the Biden administration, but by people in the press who frankly should know better, is the reason that this vaccine hesitancy exists is due to the fact that these are Trump supporters. And you can pretty quickly dismiss that if you're willing to take even a few minutes to click on a link. For example, a survey that was done by the Kaiser organization, and the Kaiser poll shows that most of the individuals who are what are called vaccine hesitant are not Trump supporters. They're not even Republicans. I mean, there are some, I'm not saying that there aren't, but you have a very significant number that would be listed either as Democratic or as independent. Now, there's another part of this. The argument is that Donald Trump did everything he could to prevent people from taking the vaccine. I think that's got to be considered wrong. As I mentioned just a minute ago, if you want to go back to that other article on misinformation, it is a great little piece. I thought about even playing it on the air, but you've heard it before, and it includes all sorts of times in which candidate Joe Biden, or incoming President Joe Biden, or incoming Vice President Kamala Harris said, I'm not sure I'm going to take the vaccine. If it was done by Trump, I don't trust it because it's a Trump vaccine, or it was done too fast, or we haven't had enough tests. Now, the argument could be made, okay, now we've rolled it out to almost 2/3 of Americans, so we have a little better understanding now of its impact. We don't certainly know the long-term impact. But the point I'm making, and I won't belabor it, is if you find yourself in some kind of conversation saying, this is just appalling. Not only is Facebook and all the social media killing people because they're posting things causing people to question the vaccines, but if it weren't for that Donald Trump, many more people would be taking the vaccines. And the reality is just the opposite if you just look at the numbers. And so I wanted to post that for you because it seems to show up on a regular basis, and even listening to the local media, they just keep coming back to the fact that it's white Republicans that are the problem. By the way, it also has a link to the number of people that are identified as minorities that aren't taking the vaccine either. And so that's the first issue. But the other one that I want to get into, and it gets back to some of the reporting that takes place, is how many people actually have died from getting the vaccine. To ask that question is to get you in a lot of trouble on social media. As a matter of fact, that question is generally not even allowed to be asked. But because of that, that has led to a very significant lawsuit in the federal court in Alabama. By the way, just as a program note, this time next week, I will be broadcasting live from Birmingham, Alabama. So we'll check it out when we get there. But the attorney, Thomas Rentz, filed a lawsuit in federal court in Alabama, and he alleges, and again, he has to prove this in a court. Just because you allege it doesn't mean it's true, but he alleges that there has been a massive government cover-up of vaccine-related U.S. deaths. And his number, he says, is around 45,000, which is much larger, to put it mildly, than the number being even begrudgingly acknowledged by anybody else in the government. Again, just because you allege it doesn't mean it's true, but since nobody else wants to cover these stories, I'm quite content to cover them here on Point of View. Now, again, in a speech that he gave recently in Anaheim, California, that's where he made that announcement. You can actually go and watch the entire announcement as well. And so there are some real questions being raised. And some of this comes, by the way, from what are called the frontline doctors. You might remember them. Some were those who were saying, look, we think that hydroxychloroquine is an effective agent as a therapy. That was dismissed because that was something being promoted by Donald Trump. Now we have evidence to suggest that it probably is effective. Ivermectin, another one that they have mentioned. So these are individuals that are convinced that there has been a cover-up in terms of the number of individuals that have died as a result of taking the vaccine. Again, even if you take the number 45,000 out of, what are we up to now, 60 plus million, it's different orders of magnitude, but I'm not surprised because we do know that people react differently to that. Now, those numbers also come back to one of these debates we've had for many months when people were dying because of or in spite of the COVID virus. How do you count those? And we've pointed out before, did a person die from the virus or did the person die with the virus? The argument that was made at the time by those people collecting the data, positive for COVID, it would be considered a COVID death. We've pointed out that sometimes you had people killed in car accidents or a motorcycle accident, one example used out of Michigan, that was then listed as a COVID death when I'm pretty sure it was the sudden deceleration against the pavement that caused the death, not the COVID. But if you're going to use that kind of argument and say, well, if these people died and they had the virus, well, is it appropriate then to look at the vaccine and to say, did these people die with the vaccine or because of the vaccine? And that may be due to some of the differences in those numbers. So that's the first issue. There is a second one before we take a break, and that is the fact that even some people that are maybe a little closer to the government are also convinced that we may be undercounting the number of vaccinated COVID cases. Now, what are we talking about here? We're talking about people who were vaccinated who then once again got the virus. A good illustration of that, and I'll use this after the break, is that we had a number of these Texas Democrats that we talked about yesterday that left Austin, Texas, went to Washington, D.C., and then tested positive for COVID, even though all of them, I assume all of them, were vaccinated. And we have a percentage of individuals who have been vaccinated who get COVID-19. These are what are called breakthrough cases. And so you have some allegations about that as well. And some epidemiologists are raising this question. One of those is Dr. Harvey Reich, who is at the Yale School of Medicine. And he says that these cases that he's looking at don't register for the CDC counts. And so the great proportion of cases they are claiming are in unvaccinated people. And that that's a fallacy because of the way the United States and the CDC count numbers. And so he's really raising some questions. This is not only just something that he has been talking about, but even the CDC, that'd be the Centers for Disease Control, have also said that they would estimate that there have been at least 4,000 plus people who have been hospitalized or died with COVID-19, even though they were fully vaccinated. The latest number is about 4,115 that they count, but the epidemiologist at Yale says, no, that's a significant undercount. Well, that may be more information you wanted to know, but it illustrates again the theme that we seem to have developed this year, and that is you just have to check this information out for yourself. There's a lawsuit right now arguing the number of vaccine deaths as being undercounted or maybe even concealed. And even the CDC is admitting that there have been at least 4,000 people that, even though they had the vaccine, have been hospitalized or died because they've had the vaccine. But there are others arguing that that is a significant undercount. So those are some facts that we've been able to dig up, and maybe we'll come back on Friday and talk about it again. But we need to take a break. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View. your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, let me just mention a few things out of what is happening in Congress, and thought I'd wind up by talking about Wikipedia. But again, as a program note, next hour we're going to have Dr. Richard Land with us. He is the executive editor of the Christian Post. He's also the president of Southern Evangelical Seminary. We'll be talking about one of the articles in the Christian Post. Some churchgoers still have no plans to go back just yet. And so we're going to talk about what's happening in the churches and kind of thinking through what the future might be, this so-called new normal. Last week I was in New York. One of the speakers was talking about the ever-changing church and the never-changing church. I mean, there's certain parts about the body of Christ that should never be changing in terms of our belief and orthodoxy and other aspects of that in church practice. But that's very different than the ever-changing nature, because a lot of people got used to Zoom, and I'm grateful for that, for those that are shut-ins and cannot participate. But I also recognize that the book of Hebrews talks about the very important aspect of gathering together, and there is so much that needs to happen within the body of Christ and in church services. So we'll talk about that with Dr. Richard Land, and then Dr. Clay Lowder will be with us, and he's a board-certified family physician, but really wants to maybe meddle in our lives a little bit and get us thinking about our health. And so that's exercise, that's diet, and a variety of other things, which we will get to. But let me talk briefly about Congress. And one of the people I follow on Instagram, as well as on Twitter, a number of things, is Representative Dan Crenshaw. He is from the 2nd Congressional District in Texas. You might remember he is the one with the eye patch because he lost sight in one eye, has had trouble with sight in the other eye, by the way, so is certainly deserving of your prayers. But I love his boldness, and he also, like I like to do every once in a while, say, can you take some of these ideas, and if you turned it around, what would that be like? And he's talking about the fact that we had, as I've mentioned more than once, a number of Democrats in the state of Texas that are in the Texas House who recognize that if they just left the state, there would not be a quorum, and so some of the work that had to be done in terms of reapportionment and even election integrity just wouldn't happen. And so they went to Washington, D.C., or welcomed by the vice president, a number of other things. So Dan Crenshaw said, imagine if 50 Republican state representatives skipped work, drank beer on a private jet while ignoring federal mask mandates, held a press conference to spread flagrant lies that have been debunked, and then infected the Speaker's office and the White House with COVID. Just imagine. Yeah, can you imagine? Let's, for example, imagine the media response to that. The media response to this has been relatively muted. Oh, yeah, there's been a few places where there's been some criticism, so we'll give credit where credit is due, but not a lot. And you can just imagine if you had 50 members of the Republican Party drinking beer on a plane, ignoring the federal mask mandate, getting possibly everybody from the Speaker of the House to the Vice President infected with COVID, that there probably would have been a little more of an outrage than you've seen so far. So I think it's a good point. Well, we're talking about Congress. There is about ready to be the select committee on the January 6th insurrection. And so this is run with a very tight grip by Nancy Pelosi. And the other day, they allowed for a few Republicans to serve on the committee. And instantaneously, the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, rejected the appointments of Representative Jim Jordan from Ohio and Jim Banks from Indiana. Now, that caused the House Minority Leader, Kevin McCarthy, to say, wait a minute, I also gave you some others, Representative Davis, for example, from Illinois, Representative Armstrong from North Dakota, Representative Nels from Texas, but, you know, I gave you 5 names. You can't just remove 2 of them, and if you don't also seat those 2, I will remove all 5 of them from the committee. And again, the heavy-handedness of this is, I think, just another illustration of what even some people that quietly like to say, or even on the Democratic side, have been such an abuse of power. Imagine in the future when it's almost certain that Kevin McCarthy will be the Speaker of the House 2 years from now, for all sorts of reasons we can get into, reapportionment and the very thin margins that Democrats have in the House right now. And then he's putting together a committee to investigate something, maybe bombs placed at the doors of the Republican Party, like happened actually during January 6th. And then all of a sudden he decides he's not going to let a few of the Democrats serve on that because he just doesn't like them. You can again see the incredible outcry that would come from the press. The fact that I'm recording this, I think, is an illustration again of why maybe you should just listen to Point of View, because not a lot of people are talking about the fact that Nancy Pelosi said we're going to have this select committee to investigate the January 6th insurrection, as she calls it. But then we're also going to determine who can be on the committee and who cannot. And if there's a Republican I don't like, I'm going to throw him off the committee. And so that is the current little squabble behind the scenes. Just before we end, though, let me, if I can, mention the issue of Wikipedia. I've got a commentary coming out next week on it, but I thought I'd give you an advance notice because I start out by simply saying, you know, things have gone really bad and gone from bad to worse when the co-founder of an internet website is criticizing his own site as an enemy of democracy. And that is Larry Sanger, who is one of the co-founders of Wikipedia. You know, he said that Wikipedia is more one-sided than ever before. It's become almost thought police. It has banned any kind of citation that comes from certain news sources like, I don't know, Daily Mail, Fox News, and others. And more than that, even talks about how it may actually have had an influence in the election. He cites, for example, the Wikipedia article on Joe Biden, and then acknowledges that there isn't anything that remotely resembles the Republican take on Biden. The particular paragraph there about the Ukrainian scandal, he says, reads like the defense attorney brief. And there's, of course, no mention, no surprise there, of the Hunter Biden laptop. And let me just say that if you're a student listening right now, you may not have turned on the radio, but maybe your parents did, or your grandparents did, or something like that, you'll find out very quickly that Wikipedia is not accepted as a source of academic papers. It's an open source collaborative one, and what you have are some of these monitors that just prevent certain kinds of information from ever being there. And we've had lots of examples here on Point of View over the years in which that has taken place. Robert Knight, for example, has been on the program with us many times, and he's had a column which appears in the Washington Times and all sorts of things. And yet what he found is that content that he actually or other people posted was deleted, and there were all sorts of errors that they had there. And he points out that, look, you know, you had ties to organizations I'm not a part of. I'm a senior fellow with the American Civil Rights Union, but you have errors there. And he was simply told that they could not change them, and they would not change them simply because he's recommending that those changes come, and that's a conflict of interest. I remember having Bill Dembski on there, and the bio they have for him is completely erroneous, and he's tried to at least get the bio fixed so that at least you have the right credentials and the right universities. No, it doesn't happen. And probably the most egregious one is John Sigenthaler. You might remember him from USA Today, but he was appalled one day that he found out that on Wikipedia it said that he was involved in the Kennedy assassinations of both John Kennedy and his brother Bobby Kennedy. There is not a bit of truth to it, but that actually surfaced and stayed there for weeks before it got changed. So, word to the wise, if you read Wikipedia, don't take everything seriously. Check it out with other sources, and that gets us back to our theme of discernment. We're going to come back and talk with Dr. Richard Land right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour, we're going to talk a little bit about what the new normal looks like. As I mentioned just last hour, I was up at Camp of the Woods last week, and one of the people talking about the ever-changing church and the never-changing church. There are certain things that are fundamental to our Christian faith in terms of the body of Christ. There are other things that change. And one of the remarkable changes this last year has been the fact that many of us have been in lockdown, and because of that, we got used to actually watching church online and engaging in Zoom calls and the rest. But what is the future for gathering together? The book of Hebrews talks about the fact that we should not neglect gathering together. Yet one of the articles we've posted here for you to read today from the Christian Post, more than 25% of regular churchgoers have no plans to go back just yet. And so this comes from our good friends at the Christian Post. Dr. Richard Land, of course, is the executive editor of the Christian Post, and you know him as well from all the other things we've talked about with him as the president of the Southern Evangelical Seminary, as well as an individual that has his doctorate from Oxford University, a master's degree from New Orleans Seminary, a bachelor's degree from Princeton. Even before that was the president of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, and an individual that has done all sorts of commentaries, both print and radio, and joins us now by phone. And Dr. Land, always great to have you on the program.
Hello, Kerby. It's good to hear your voice again. And isn't that Camp of the Woods a great experience?
Yes, I know you'd been up there, so I thought I'd mention it real quickly. I was just doing the seminars, but there's a good example. I wouldn't want to be there in the winter.
I wouldn't want to be there in the wintertime, though.
No. I have been there in the winter when the snow is so bad that you can't even move, but it is a wonderful place. Anyway, what about this? We are going to talk about a couple of the very good articles in the Christian Post, and I want to use this to encourage people to go to ChristianPost.com, but we also have this article here. 25% of regular churchgoers have no plans to go back just yet. Well, what's the future going to be like? Can you give us some perspective?
Well, I think I can. It's not going. The future is going to be different than the past. Nothing's going to be the same. The pandemic has impacted everything. It's going to change how we work, where we work, how we commute, where we live, and it obviously is impacting the way we worship. My parents always told me that World War II changed everything in America. Nothing was ever the same, and I think the pandemic has done the same thing. And that's just a fact that we need to adjust to and to seek to minister to. That study shows that what I've been hearing from pastors all over the country, large and small churches, that a significant number of their people started worshiping online when they couldn't worship in person, and they like it so much they're not coming. They haven't come back, and whether they're ever going to come back is I think an open question. I call them flip-flop Christians. They get up on Sunday morning, they put on their flip-flops, and they stay in their pajamas, and they get some coffee, and they have virtual church, and they like it. They like not having to get up and go to church, and all of the discombobulation on Sunday morning and Sunday night of doing that. And I think that's one thing I've heard. Another thing I've heard from the pastors, Kerby, is that some of them have increased numbers, because if you count the virtual worshipers, they're getting people online that were de-churched. They were unchurched. They were unchurched. These folks that 25% are de-churched for the moment. These are unchurched people that I think the pandemic has reminded Americans of the sense of a sense of mortality. Americans can get into a false security. You know, we have a tremendous medical system. If you don't engage in dangerous behavior, you get your checkup, you get your shots, and you do what the doctor tells you to, you can normally expect to live to be 70 plus. Not anymore. I think everybody knows somebody who's died of COVID. And so there's a new sense of mortality, and people are thinking about spiritual things. And so I think there's a tremendous opportunity for evangelism for the unchurched. And for the de-churched, I think we need to remind them, we need to reach out to them and try to invite them to small groups of their brothers and sisters in Christ, because I think they're going to experience what I experienced. I couldn't go to church for 8 weeks because of the pandemic closures. And when I went back to church, I was shocked. And I confessed my sin to God, that I had been taking fellowship and worship for granted.
Yes.
Because I've gone to worship ever since I was a toddler. But there is something spiritually magical about simultaneously being able to commune vertically with God and horizontally with your brothers and sisters in Christ. And I was overwhelmed by it. And I promised the Lord I would never take it for granted again. And I understood in a new way the verse you quoted from Hebrews, when we were told not to forsake the assembling of ourselves together as the manner of some is. There's a reason why God wants us to assemble together. We only together in fellowship can we plumb the depths and scale the heights and embrace the width of all that God has for us. We can't do it alone and apart, and we can't do it just virtually either.
Again, and that's encouragement, it's admonition, it's accountability. There's so many things that happen. And you said something in passing I thought I'd just pick up on for a minute, and that is, you, of course, are familiar with Probe Ministries, and we just finished doing this huge survey. We're talking about thousands and thousands of individuals in which we've identified a very significant group, which we call the unaffiliated. Used to call them the nuns, but people used to think we meant N-U-N-E-S, N-O-N-E-S. And these are people atheist, agnostic, and no preference. And they're the unchurched or the de-churched, and it has been striking to me that when you go and sort of dig in a little bit with this massive survey, you find that there aren't that many that are necessarily against Christianity. Yeah, there's some that have read Richard Dawkins or Daniel Dennett or Sam Harris or somebody like that, but most of them just don't see church as relevant, and because of that, they're never going to walk in the back door of a church, but they might, just out of curiosity, tune you in online. And so, as you said, I think there is a great evangelistic opportunity, isn't there?
There really is. In fact, the Christian Post sponsored a book collection of chapters by 35 or so religious leaders on where we go from here, called Arise Together. And one of the themes there was this is a real opportunity. To Americans have been jarred out of their spiritual complacency, and there's a real opportunity here to get people to think about eternal things.
Well, let's see if we can take a break. And when we come back, I want to talk a little bit about some other aspects of this article, but also just to point people to the Christian Post, because there are so many articles. I've noticed, for example, one of those, when we're talking about church, is probably one of the most significantly watched ones right now. Worship leader no longer supports some of these particular music groups because of a false gospel message. So I don't want to get into worship wars, but I just thought it was kind of interesting to see that when you look at some of these articles that go viral, as they say, some of them have to do with what is the future for the church in terms of music, what is the future of the church in terms of attendance. Also, we'll come back and talk about a membership. It used to be that you had almost 70% of Americans had some formal church membership. As you would imagine, that number is down to about 49% and dropping, and there have been hundreds of thousands of people, even in the Southern Baptist Convention, of which Richard Land and myself are members, that have lost members. So we want to talk about what that means. And most importantly, if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, 1-800-351-1212. Privileged to have with us a little bit longer Dr. Richard Land, Southern Evangelical Seminary, Executive Order of the Christian Post. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, Americans don't know much about the Constitution, and it apparently is getting worse. 9 years ago, I wrote and recorded a commentary about constitutional literacy. Back then, I quoted John Whitehead of the Rutherford Institute, who testified before a subcommittee of the Senate Judiciary Committee concerning the rule of law. He provided some alarming statistics based upon a survey done about 10 years ago. They found that only 1 in 4 Americans could name more than one of the freedoms guaranteed by the First Amendment. In one study, they found that only 1 person out of 1,000 people could name all 5 First Amendment freedoms. Those would be the freedom of religion, speech, press, and assembly, along with the right to petition the government for redress of grievances. I thought about those statistics when I read an editorial written by Cal Thomas. He quoted from a recent poll conducted by the University of Pennsylvania's Annenberg Public Policy Center. They found that 37% of those interviewed could not name any of the 5 rights protected in the First Amendment. You know, nearly a decade ago, we were lamenting how few could name more than one of the First Amendment freedoms. Today, more than a third cannot name any of the freedoms in the First Amendment. Americans are not only ignorant of the Constitution, many are ignorant of the structure of government. A third could not name one of the 3 branches of government, and about 1/4 could correctly name all 3. Unfortunately, some of these Americans who are ignorant of the Constitution and of our government actually vote in elections. You can't protect the rights guaranteed in the Constitution if you don't know what they are. You can't protect our system of government if you don't know how it is structured. I hope you can see that we have lots of work to do to educate Americans about the Constitution. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Will church members come back to the church, and what will happen in the future? We'd love to get your thoughts. 1-800-351-1212. Dr. Richard Land with us as well, executive editor of the Christian Post. In just a minute, I'll talk about some of the great articles there on the Christian Post and why you need to make that a place where you can find some of these articles. But let's take a phone call or two. We'll go to North Carolina on the Good News Network. Jim, I think you have some comments about all of this.
Yes, thanks for taking my call, Kerby. Churches have become Laodiceas. All right, that's why people are leaving. They're not preaching the King James Bible. They're not preaching the full Word of God. They're dancing around it. And they're preaching a soft message trying to appease everybody instead of putting the fear of God in people. I mean, the Word of God tells us that, the fear of the Lord is beginning wisdom. And without the fear of God, knowing that there's a heaven and a hell, that's where we're lost people. We need this, and we're not getting it from our churches. That's why they're declining.
What about that, Dr. Land? I mean, you have certainly been involved in preaching in churches and educating future preachers, and certainly looked at the church growth movement and a number of other things. Any thoughts that you might have?
Well, I think that he's partially right. There has been an uncertain sound coming from certain pulpits. And no denomination is immune to it. We're under far more intense cultural pressure to conform to the culture and not speak about certain topics and to trim the message than was the case 30 or 40 years ago. And I think some pastors and some churches have succumbed to it. But the gospel is being preached in lots of churches. And churches across the board are having this 20 to 25% drop as a result of the pandemic. And I think some of it is just passivity and convenience, and some of it is they don't realize that they're missing some things. When you don't go to church and you don't worship with your brothers and sisters in Christ, you lose the blessing of obedience, and there is a blessing to obedience, and they lose the blessing of fellowship. 1 Corinthians makes it very clear that God gives each of us at least one spiritual gift, and He gives it to us to minister to our brothers and sisters in Christ. And if we're not there, we can't minister it, and we can't be ministered to. And when we spend a lot of time quite correctly emphasizing that salvation is by grace alone, through faith alone, and it's individual. But when we talk about growing in grace, none of us are going to be all that God has designed us to be and wants us to be, apart from regular fellowship and worship among fellow believers.
And you're talking about something, Jim was talking about this idea of teaching the whole counsel of God, but you're bringing up another part of that, not only what comes from the pulpit, what comes in the fellowship hall, and that is we need all of the gifts of the body, because if you just try to live the Christian life by yourself, you will have those gifts, and you will maybe interpret Scripture only according to your particular bias or experience. And that's why we need brothers and sisters in the Lord together so that we can minister to one another, but also so that we can have a more accurate understanding of God's Word.
Iron sharpens iron. I've often issued a challenge to preachers. Next year, just preach on verses in the Bible that you haven't underlined.
Wow. Yes, that would be good. and of course, that's the advantage of a kind of a expository preaching. But before I take another phone call, I don't want to go too much further because, again, you are the executive editor of the Christian Post. I've got this article here that has to do with the churchgoers that are not going back to church. One of your more viral ones has to do with some people really raising some questions about some of the kind of worship songs are being portrayed. And then, of course, you get into almost all the cultural issues. So talk about what people will find when they go to the Christian Post, because I know that was one of the reasons I wanted to have you on, so we could highlight some of the great material that you've put together there.
Well, there are lots of folks working at the Christian Post, and as executive editor, I have a lot of say about policy, but I don't do the hard everyday work. I write a column once a week for them. I want to give credit to all the hardworking folks there, but we strive mightily to be objective and fair from a Christian perspective. We're going to give them the Christian perspective on the news. We're going to give it warts and all. We talk about things that are wrong in the church. We talk about things that are wrong in the culture. We talk about how we should respond to the challenges that we face. And I find, I read the Christian Post. I find myself being blessed by it every day. It just, I learn things I wouldn't learn otherwise. I get a better perspective on things that I know something about. I find it both encouraging and informative every day.
And sometimes challenging, too. It really kind of gets you thinking about some of these issues that aren't being addressed too many other places. So I just wanted people to know about that. Let me take another phone call because, again, you, as always, generate some questions and comments. So we'll go to Missouri this time. And Scott, you're on with Dr. Richard Land.
Thanks for taking the call, Kerby. Hello, Dr. Lamb. I, too, am a fellow Southern Baptist. But one of the things I think we forget about church attendance is similar to any kind of assembly. A cord of three strands is not quickly broken, and when you're of like mind to resist the cultural influence, you're more likely to stand against that bad influence than you are if you're alone. I'd like to hear your comments about that. Thanks for taking the call, Kerby. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Well, you're absolutely right. God created us as social creatures for fellowship with Him and for fellowship with each other. And we just don't flourish separate and alone. One of the baneful impacts of the internet is studies show us now that as young people have spent more and more time online and less and less time in actual interaction with real human beings, that without exception, and that's a phrase that sociologists never used, but they used it, without exception, young people the more they're online, the more likely they are to be depressed. The less they're online, the less likely they are to be depressed. Because they live in this virtual world where they have the illusion of having social interaction, but they don't. It's like cotton candy. It doesn't nourish the soul. And there's no question that we need fellowship with brothers and sisters in Christ. God created us for fellowship with Him and fellowship with each other.
So again, as you go to the Christian Post, you're going to find all sorts of very good articles. But I thought I'd just get your thoughts real quickly about how do we reach out to, this is on the second page, those individuals. They tend to be a very high percentage that are Generation Y or Generation Z, Millennials or iGen, who express no religious preference. It does seem to me in the surveys that I've seen, including the one we've just done, that it isn't so much hostility to Christianity, it's that it isn't relevant. So would you suggest that some of the pastors and Sunday school teachers and Bible fellowship leaders and small group leaders listening right now might want to work harder to show how the Bible is relevant to your daily life and how you really cannot survive without some of the kinds of things that God has revealed in His Word?
Yes, I definitely agree with that, Kerby. And I think that the likelihood that you're going to get a lot of them to come from where they are immediately back to church is slim. I think we need to go out and meet people where they are,
right,
and try to take them to where we want them to be. And that means engaging them in friendships, engaging them, and invite them to a Bible study in your home where you're talking about these things. Talk about what does the Bible have to say about this? What does the Bible have to say about purpose? For me, I have found that most people are responsive when you tell them, look, God never made a nobody. Everybody's a somebody to God. God has a plan and a purpose for your life. And God knitted you and born you together in your mother's womb, and all of your parts were written in God before any of them came to be. But you can't really know who you are. You can't really know what God intends for you to do with your life, why He created you as the unique human being you are, until you come to know Jesus as your Lord and Savior.
Let me just mention that we have a link to your website. It's drrichardland.com. That's a way that you can hear the commentaries. All the archives are there. If people want to contact you, maybe have you come and speak, lead a seminar, a conference, all sorts of things, we've posted that. And, of course, we've posted just one of these articles from the Christian Post, and I would encourage you to go to christianpost.com or simply just go to pointofview.net, and you'll find it there. Dr. Richard Land, very good.
If they want to get me quickly, they can go to rdland@ses.edu.
That would be good, too. ses.edu, great place to learn apologetics, and, of course, we think very highly.
rdland@ses.edu.
Right. Well, thank you for joining us, and look forward to the next opportunity.
Well, thank you. It's always good to talk with you, Kerby.
We are going to take a break, and when we come back, this last half hour, we're going to talk with Dr. Clay Lowder, and he's new, and we've never had him on the program, but I'm looking forward to that, and he's going to challenge you. We've been challenging you in your spiritual life. Now we're going to be challenging you in your physical life as well. I think you're really going to enjoy that, and that's coming up right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View radio talk show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Last half hour, we're going to spend some time talking about your physical, mental, and spiritual health. And it is all part of a new book that I think you will really enjoy, Winner's Travel, A Doctor's Guide to Mental, Physical, and Spiritual Health. Dr. Clay Lowder with us, and he is a board-certified family physician and has been that for 25 years. For those of you in South Carolina, he loves Clemson, everything, whether football, baseball, all the way down. You can't get through this book without a lot of comments about Clemson. We'll get to that in just a minute. But this book is really, in a sense, to give you a game plan to really reach your full potential. He's also established what's called the Winner's Travel Foundation, and really has had just a great ministry and outreach to caretakers, veterans, and all sorts of individuals. And Dr. Lowder, just a great delight to have you on the program with us today.
Hey, good afternoon, Kerby. Thank you for having me. I'm jacked up about being on this show, so thank you.
Might also mention Colonial Healthcare, so our listeners in North Carolina, South Carolina may be familiar with that. And I think it's important to just talk about how this book came together, because you fill this book with lots of stories and anecdotes. But being a doctor, you meet people sometimes when they have a point of need, but they aren't aware of it. And if they don't have this game plan that you talk about, it's kind of like what you talk about in terms of sports. If you don't have a game plan for basketball, baseball, football, whatever, you're going to lose. And so the idea is by having a game plan, you'll be a winner, isn't it?
Yes, sir. Life is short, right? Doesn't matter if you're 80 or 40. I just went to my cousin's funeral. He was 27. So life is short.
Wow.
So you got to game plan it, man. You got to take some time and think about your goals and who you want to be. And I always ask these young people, and the goal of the book is, where do you see yourself in 10 years? Same with you, Kerby. Same with me. You know, even when we get older, what do you want to see and where do you want to go? And Winner's Travel, that's my motto. And just trying to get people to think about life a little bit. We're so busy in life, we don't work on it. And so I guess that's my message. The Lord just kind of put this book on my heart. I've been, coaching people in exam rooms for 25 years, and he just kind of said, let's reach a larger audience. So I appreciate you having me on. That's what I'm trying to do.
Yes, 15 chapters, but I think I might just mention near the end there, you have a workbook where people can actually get out a pen. I love these books where you not only read, but then respond. Where do you see yourself in 10 years? That's what you just mentioned. Who is currently in your top 5? How do you want to add to your top 5 and why that person? What are good habits for you to practice? What are bad habits you'd like to kick? So you really take some time to mess with our lives a little bit. And again, I get the sense that in your family, of course, you go on and say that you always give 110%. There's a lot of high achievers in your family. At least that was what I picked away from the book, that almost everybody there is on the fast track and really wanting to try to make a positive difference in their world.
Well, thank you. Thank you for even looking at the book. And I give it to people and I say, what'd you think? They say, well, I didn't read it. I'm like, okay. But it's been neat to share some of my family stories. My dad was a cotton farmer.
Yes.
And I grew up, working in a hot cotton field. And then my mom was a PhD in English. So I'm kind of a weird blend there. And so it's kind of a blend of storytelling. And I love to tell the miracles that I see in that God, I just happened to be in a part of a couple of miracles, and I got to see them firsthand. And just sharing my life with other people has been a real neat thing that he's kind of blessed me with.
Well, one of the other things I thought I'd mention, just mention it in your bio, but you go into it in a little more detail in Chapter 4 of this Winner's Travel Foundation, which recognizes caretakers of those with ailments. And you have used this over the years to really reach out to caretakers, to veterans, and a number of others. And of course, we always want to support those individuals that are in the service industry. We certainly want to support, as always, people that have served in the military or first responders. And you seem to have the same heart that we have here at Point of View.
Man, you got it, buddy. There's just something in my heart that I gave away a trip in like 2010 for a lady. She had a child with autism, and I could just feel the burden of her in the exam room, and she loved her child, and but she can't travel like we can. And my wife and I gave her a trip for Christmas to Disney World with her son, and it changed me. It made me feel so good. I said, I want to spend the rest of my life giving out trips like this, special life-changing trips. And we set out on a mission, and that's where we got blessed with the foundation so the Winners Travel Foundation, we give away life-changing trips, and we do it for those that serve us, like our veterans and our caretakers. In fact, this year I'm announcing we're sending a group of caretakers, like 15 of kids with special needs, to this private island, the BVI, for an amazing, it is just the coolest experience you've ever seen. And then I'm going to do it again for veterans. The day after Veterans Day, we're sending 26 veterans to this private island just to get renewed, refreshed, people who've just given it all on the line for me and my family. And so it's just a way of giving back, and I'm just so excited about it.
Let me just mention, too, we have a link to your Facebook page, which is Winners Travel Foundation, so you can find that there on the website. And then you also see that we have the website itself, which is winnerstravel.org. So some great material there as well. But, before you joined us, we were talking a little bit about this so-called new normal, and we were talking with Dr. Richard Land about, a lot of people aren't coming back to church because they kind of got used to watching online. You've got a chapter 7, which I thought was very interesting, about the future of medicine. This has been an incredible year for you because a lot of people couldn't meet you face to face. They had to meet you through kind of a teledoc type of apparatus. And I'm wondering if you could just maybe before we take a break and then get into some other aspects of your book, what you see for the future of medicine, because you give us a quote from Doc Brown in Back to the Future in terms of future is whatever you make it, so make it a good one. Well, in some respects, we are right now kind of figuring out what the new normal is going to be, right? And we're figuring out what the new kind of medicine is going to be like, too, aren't we?
Yes, sir. What a curveball. What a curveball. In my clinic in South Carolina, we've established a drive-through for COVID, and we've done over 50,000 tests in drive-through, and boy, it just stings. Everybody's sick of it, but it is a new normal. We're going to have to adapt to it. The future of medicine is pretty exciting to me. I think the technology where people are wearing wearable devices like an Apple Watch. I've already found a few cases of heart arrhythmias just by people wearing their watch. I think that kind of remote monitoring where you meet patients in their house, you have people visiting them weekly instead of them coming and sitting in the waiting room. How terrible is that, And so I'm hoping in the future it's more of a hands-on, almost like the doctor visiting you in the buggy. We are going to have eyes and ears in your home and get to see you where you are. I think the genetic tests of the future are going to be fascinating where Kerby, you'll go to my office and get a cheek swab to screen you for colon cancer. If you have the gene for that, of course, you'd start getting a colonoscopy at an early age. So I'm excited about the future, and there's a lot of things in my book that I include on that.
Yeah, that is certainly the case. Okay, we've been from preaching to meddling. Now we're going to meddle in people because one of your chapters gets into physical health, and you remind us that high blood pressure is the silent killer. The second factor is high cholesterol, smoking, number of others. So talk about that for just a minute. We've got a doctor on the line, and I just think some people, especially some of us men, we just ignore some of those signs. And what should we be thinking about right now in terms of our physical health?
Well, first thing is get a physical, stay up on the latest and greatest in prevention. I think every colonoscopy now at age 45, I think the best heart test is a nuclear stress test. And I did my first one when I was 40. Heart disease runs in my family. We have pretty accurate blood pressure cuffs now. You can get it in any pharmacy. And you can do your own blood pressure, and you can watch it because it is silent. So why not spend $40 and get a blood pressure cuff? Same is true with getting a prostate. There's a blood test for PSA for prostate of men over 50. Mammograms every year for women over 40. Every year, those save a lot of lives. The newest thing is for smokers. There's a 25-second low-dose CAT scan you can do. Doesn't give you hardly any radiation. Very safe. If I find a lung nodule and it's the size of a dime, I can cure your lung cancer. If it's a quarter, there's nothing I can do for you. So it's that becoming that technological. So stay on top here, especially men. You're right. Men don't like to go to the doctor.
That's right. Well, let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk with Dr. Clay Lowder for a little bit longer. But if you'd like to join the conversation, maybe you have a specific question, got a doctor on the line for the moment, so you can give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. If you find yourself saying, I'd like to know a little bit more about this foundation, I'd like to know a little bit more about Winter's Travel, I'd like to know a little bit more about some of the things that we can be a part of, and also some of these gift of travel. What does that all mean? So we'll come back and talk about that, but wanted to give you a chance to know a little bit more about the book and the organization. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, Dr. Clay Lowder with us as we talk about his book, Winter's Travel. If you would like to know a little bit more about the book, about the organization, it is all available on our website. And Clay, just a minute ago, we had a man by the name of George. I guess he lives just down the road from you, and he knows you and just had to say all sorts of very nice things about you, but didn't need to go on the air. So obviously, we've got some people saying some nice things about what you have done. But I think there are some listeners that might say, what about this travel stuff? I didn't know about that. Of course, one of the links we have there talks about a trip that is taking place in October, and that's when you will be speaking, president of Clemson University. What a surprise. You love Clemson and all sorts of other things. But there's some opportunities for a caretaker summit. There's an opportunity in November for a veterans summit. And I know we have some listeners that might say, well, tell us a little bit more about this. What's the purpose? And is there a way we can nominate somebody? So we'd love to know a little bit more about that.
Yes, sir. Thank you. It's a passion of mine. It's a way of giving back. And I really would love for you to go to winnerstravel.org. If you got a caretaker of a kid with special needs, put them in for the trip. It is going to be unbelievable. Brittany Turner's there. She's a self-made millionaire, bought a $50 million private island at age 32 by flipping properties. Just an amazing teacher. Dr. Clements is going. And so please, if you know somebody like that, nominate them. Of course, I'll take any support I can get. I'm also sending the veterans. If you know a veteran that deserves it or needs some help, we're going to have a psychologist on that trip. I just know one thing. There's a surefire way to cure depression. I learned this long ago, and I've taught it to many patients, and that's find somebody who needs help and help them. And it's just a motto of my life. And this travel thing, the Winners Travel motto is just helping people and helping them travel. I've been blessed. I can travel and go, but there's people that can't out there, and a lot of them serve other people. And so that's where my heart is, and that's what will change our country and make it better, is that we just look for people we can help all day. I'm telling you, Kerby, it'll give you a buzz like no other to see somebody go on one of these trips and change their life. And it's just the power in my life. So thank you for talking about it.
Well, again, I appreciate you being such a philanthropist in that regard, and certainly want to feature what you have available so people can find it at winnerstravel.org, or simply go to pointofview.net. We've got all the information about you, about the organization, about the book, and a lot more. And since you mentioned that idea of depression, one of the sections you have is on mental issues. Chapter 8, Laugh Out Loud. And, of course, you have a nice quote from Proverbs 17, a merry heart doth us good like a medicine. And that is a real problem. This has been a difficult year of a pandemic and a lockdown, and the issues of loneliness, depression, anxiety, panic attacks, even a topic we addressed yesterday, are surfacing more than ever. So it does seem to me that there are some things that we should do for our own mental health, just as you suggested some things we should do for our physical health. So can you give us some direction there?
Yes, sir. My top 2 recommendations are, number 1, like I just said, find somebody who needs help and help them. And it doesn't have to be big-time trips, Kerby. It can be go cut their grass, go take them a meal, pay for somebody's meal. It can be very simple. It'll do you some good to help somebody. Number 2, always have a vacation plan. And it doesn't have to be exotic. You can just say, hey, we're going here. We're going to walk this state park. There's some beautiful areas across the U.S. The state park system's amazing. Just go, just make a plan, game plan your life. And that can even be short term. And I think that'll just help us pull out of this. And Lord willing, we'll be out of this by the fall, and everything will be back to normal. But so that's my 2 best mental health tips.
I might just mention there's also a section in Chapter 11 on the mental health, but let's, if we can, just before we run out of time, go to Chapter 12, and that is the whole issue of spiritual health. I think that sometimes when we think about our health, it's almost like we have various buttons or maybe dials on the dashboard, and people that are really kind of paying attention will look at maybe the physical and the mental, but there's another dashboard, and that is one that's measuring your spiritual health. But sometimes people don't know how to go about encouraging them in a spiritual way. Can you give us some ideas there?
Yeah, I got 2 great ones for there. Number 1, be by yourself a little bit. Just simple. Just put your phone down, put all the technology down, and go to nature and just sit and meditate or pray, if you will. That's what I do. And then, just take some 5 minutes just to relax and take some deep breaths. You don't have to call it yoga or meditation. People get spooked with that. But if you just sit and breathe sometimes and just be, it'll just calm you. And then number two, I'm always reading good books. I'm always looking for some spiritual guidance. I love Andy Andrews, who wrote a book called The Noticer and Noticer Returns, which gives you a lot of Christian perspective. And I just enjoy his writing. And I'm always, looking for things to motivate me spiritually. And because we all need help. You think you're just going to wake up and be naturally spiritual, but I found I got to work on it,
Sure.
Even when I'm doing good, sometimes I have to work on it. So that'd be my encouragement.
Just before I let you go, one other thing is I mentioned at the back that you have a winner's travel mini workbook, and you have all sorts of questions that you're asking people. And so in some respects, you've designed this book so that I can do a self-assessment. But the way this is put together, isn't it also possible that some of our friends out here that maybe are Sunday school teachers, Bible fellowship teachers, small group leaders, they could actually use this and get a couple of copies of the book from you, or certainly find online, and then take an entire group through that. And in some respects, some of that group dynamics might be a real positive way to begin to address the mental, physical, and spiritual issues as well.
Man, Kirby, I'd be floored and honored if somebody used that for a Sunday school or a lesson for church. My mom would just burst with pride. And I tell you what, I'll give away 10 free books. If you have listeners that'll email right now or contact you through you send me the physical addresses, I'll send out 10 free books to people like that.
Well, that's something we wanted to make available to you, if nothing else. And again, the book is entitled Winner's Travel, A Doctor's Guide to the Mental, Physical, and Spiritual Health. Just came out, so you might be saying, well, I'll look for it in my local bookstore. Well, it's been around for a while, but because of that, it's the first time I've seen it. So even though it's out there, you might not be able to find it in a bookstore. If you do, great. But I think the better idea is to simply click on the button there that allows you to get it, and you can get it either in paperback or Kindle. And I just think it'd be a great way to begin to have that 10,000-mile wheel checkup that you sometimes need, and to learn from a man that's been in the medical field for a long time and really wants to help you with your mental, physical, and spiritual health and get that wheel alignment so everything's going in the right direction. So, Clay Lowder, thank you very much, and we look forward to the next opportunity. And thank you again for the philanthropy that you've been involved with, and just the opportunity to maybe have a great ministry to caretakers and veterans and other individuals. So thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me. You're a great host, and I appreciate it.
Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back tomorrow, we're going to get into some other issues as well. Going to be talking to a man that actually ran a baseball team, but now has done a number of other things, which I think will be an encouragement to you. From time to time, I do want to get away from some of the difficulties we deal with in the news and give you some encouragement. I hope this last half hour has been encouragement to you. Tomorrow will be that same way, but then, of course, we will cover some other issues in the news, and then, of course, Friday is our weekend edition. That's where we'll cover so many other topics. So if you find yourself saying, you've covered a lot in 2 hours and I want to go back and review some of that, you can certainly do that by finding the articles or clicking on the button that allows you to download the podcast. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. Have a great day, and we will see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.